Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm actually not joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. My dad is on a bit of a sabbatical as he's on vacation visiting some family. So instead, I have my cousin Eli joining me to talk a little bit about this upcoming game. You might remember him from previous appearances. It's a bit of the Troy McClure. You might remember me from previous shows, such as What's Going On Over There? But Eli, how are you doing? Welcome back.
I'm doing all right. Happy to be back. We had some wacky weather earlier this week. Some pretty strong windstorm up in Seattle. But I have power, and it looks like I'll be able to, enjoy watching some Packers football this weekend.
Well, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. The enjoy part, I think, is maybe still a little bit up in the air. But yeah, you were out there in a whole. Basically a tornado, it seemed like. I was like, what is the difference between 60-mile-per-hour gusts and a tornado at this point? I mean, we were joking. You were probably watching that Thursday night game with the snow and like, oh, this is easy. Like, what are we complaining about out here?
Yeah. I mean, and Chris Boswell clearly agreed. Made a couple kicks. But yeah, I opened my front door that night and just got hit in the face with it. So I'm
like
happy
a Looney
that that's
Tunes character.
Over. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, Chris Boswell made some kicks. I'm going to have to take the broadcast and your word for it, because I got to say, as soon as he kicked it, I did not see the ball anymore. Off his foot, the ball was just into the white abyss, and I was watching, I was like, I really hope that went in, because I need that for fantasy. But like you mentioned, we are here today to preview the upcoming Packers game against the San Francisco 49ers. Packers 7-3, Niners 5-5, moving into this Week 12 game. Lot to play for in this one. The Niners are very desperate right now, coming to town in Green Bay. They're 5-5, and they are currently last in the NFC West, which is, probably not where they expected to be, but they're only a game back of the division-leading Cardinals, who are 6-4. And I think the math says that they could end up at first in the division after this week if a certain number of things break right for them. And I think I also saw, we were talking about the New York Times playoff predictor. I think right now, in this game, if they win, they're at a 47% chance of making the playoffs, but if they lose, they're at a 17% chance of making the playoffs. So a lot to play for in this one for the Niners. They're coming to town very desperate, and the Packers could use a good performance as well, as they're coming off back-to-back games where they were not playing their best football, huh?
Yeah, I think that whole NFC West is kind of cannibalizing each other's playoff chances. I think only one of them is going to make it out. So hopefully we can make sure it's not the Niners, because I would prefer not to see them in the playoffs.
I would prefer to see any other one of those teams.
We've done that too many times.
Yeah, and the Niners hold a special place of anger in my heart as someone who grew up in the Bay Area and had to watch the Packers lose to the Niners several times and then go to school the next day and just get absolutely pooped on by every single one of my friends. So I'm really tired of the San Francisco 49ers. We could really use a win against them. But we're going to preview everything for this game coming up. Before we do, though, just a couple of pitches. If you like what you hear today, please, subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment. We'd really appreciate it, whether that's, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, every single one of them, all three, if you would really like. And then please, give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out, whenever we have new episodes, whenever there's an injury report update, whenever there are roster moves, content from other Packers content creators. We're in the process of making a Blue Sky, but we're having some technical difficulties in terms of linking emails. But we will hopefully have that out to you as well, so we'll be active on both platforms. But anyway, that is the spiel. That is the pitch. Eli, we don't have a whole lot of, Packers-related news to go right now. The only thing that I realized we forgot to mention the other day is that Mark Murphy, they announced, is going to be put into the Packers Hall of Fame. They announced that, I think, on Monday or Tuesday. So that will be coming up probably when he retires this coming offseason. So exciting news for him. Exciting. He's definitely been, a good steward of the franchise as he moves into, retiring. But that's pretty much the only Packers-related news. So should we just get into this game?
Sounds good.
All right. Well, it's kind of weird because we're going to start with the injury report as we always do. But there's a lot up in the air, specifically for the 49ers side of the injury report. So let's start with the Packers side, though. And really only two names to watch. Jair Alexander, we learned the other day, this is actually some major news that was broke by Matt Schneidman and also broke by Jair Alexander himself. I guess he was just like, yeah, no, this is what's going on. Apparently he has a torn PCL that he suffered against the Jaguars and then, missed the Lions game, had the bye week, and then tried to play against the Bears. Played 10 snaps and was just like, I can't go. It's just not going to work. So it sounds like he re-aggravated against the Bears, he said, which is not great. Initially, we had thought that it was just a case of, oh, he tried to go, it didn't work. But it sounds like he actually had a re-aggravation. So we have no idea what the timetable is like. We have no idea how much time he's going to miss. But he is not going to play in this game, it sounds like. We don't have the official injury report yet, but he did not practice Thursday or Friday or Wednesday, so he hasn't practiced at all this week. So he's probably not going to play. And then the other piece of news is that Edgerrin Cooper hurt his hamstring at the end of Wednesday's practice and then has not practiced Thursday or Friday, sounding like he's not going to be available either. Those two players not available, Eli. Not great in terms of having team speed. Not great in terms of being able to cover anyone on defense. How are you feeling about that? It's not great.
So I'm worried. I will say, so I would say last year's 49ers were like the Avengers with Debo and Ayuk and McCaffrey and Kittle all healthy. They're a little less healthy this year, so I'm not as terrified. I don't think we're just guaranteed to get blown up by the offense that they're putting on the field. But it's still not a good sign to not have your key playmakers like Jair out there, dealing with the offensive threats that they are putting out.
Yeah, and so it kind of feels like it's probably going to be Keyshawn Nixon on the outside with Valentine on the outside as well. They've kind of pivoted to using Carrington Valentine instead of Eric Stokes post-bye, which is for the best. It is what it is. It's just time to move on from Stokes. Cooper one I'm a little bit more worried about, honestly. I know Jair is obviously the better player than Cooper, but I have more faith in the backup corner, having Carrington Valentine out there than I do, a linebacker trio of just Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, and Eric Wilson as they try and cover Christian McCaffrey in space, try and cover George Kittle in space, try and cover Deebo Samuel in space. None of those guys either are fast or good at moving in the right direction when the ball is snapped. So I think that's going to be definitely something to keep an eye on, and we'll talk about as we talk about this game in terms of things that we're maybe nervous about. But moving over to the Niners side of the injury report, where I think things are maybe even more interesting, unless there was anything else you wanted to talk about on the Packers side.
No, that's it for me on the Packers.
Yeah, the Niners side is a lot more interesting, though. So the big thing is Brock Purdy is day-to-day with a shoulder injury, and it actually sounds like we learned this morning he had an MRI at one point this week, and his status is very much in question. So just a little bit that is interesting is on Thursday, he was limited, and he threw off to the side and didn't participate in the individual drills that the rest of the quarterbacks were doing, it sounds like. Went back inside, and then normally, I guess, speaks to the media on Thursday. It's like his regularly scheduled time every week. He speaks with the media. They actually canceled that meeting. So what is going on? I don't really know. It sounds like, Eli, though, you have some information about, if he is not able to go, it sounds like it's going to be Brandon Allen.
Yeah, so I did a little bit of a dive into Brandon Allen because I suspect that's a name that is not familiar across households in America.
I mean, it is like the most backup quarterback sounding name I've ever heard in my life. Like,
right.
it's the most NPC quarterback name I've ever heard.
Yeah, that's somebody who gets added to your team at the end of Madden just in case. But yeah, Brandon Allen was drafted in 2016 out of Arkansas by the Jacksonville Jaguars. He sat until 2019, where he played his first snaps for the Broncos. He played 176 snaps that season. In 2020 for the Bengals, he had a serviceable backup stretch. He played 5 games, 277 snaps, threw for 925 yards and had a 63% completion rate that season. So that was like his most prototypical backup time, and was throwing 150, 200 yards a game, threw a touchdown, threw 5 touchdowns during that stretch. So did backup things.
Yeah, it sounds like he's fine. He's a guy. He's a guy out there. And it's interesting because they have Brandon Allen, who it sounds like is the backup. Like if Brock Purdy cannot go, it will be Brandon Allen. They also have the Pastronaut, Josh Dobbs, just kind of on the roster, hanging out there. It sounds like he was beaten out in camp. They brought him in to be the backup in the offseason, and it sounds like Allen was just, better at the scheme or whatever. I wonder if, Purdy can't go, maybe they run some packages with Dobbs just to, screw with us. Maybe.
That's
I don't know.
I'd be wondering about, especially after last week where we had a couple times where Caleb Williams,
more than a couple
sideline for a couple first downs.
Yeah. Oh God, I was pulling my hair out.
that seems like the exact kind of thing they could deploy Josh Dobbs for.
And especially a team where they've struggled in the red zone, maybe some mobility, extra mobility, although Brock Purdy is mobile, but some extra mobility at the quarterback position, maybe, a little get out of jail free card there. I don't know, but that's definitely the one to keep your eye on the most. But they do still have several other high profile injuries. Nick Bosa with a hip and oblique injury did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. We don't have the Friday injury report yet for the Niners because they practice on West Coast time way in the afternoon. We are recording this Friday morning, but keep an eye once again at Father Son Packer on Twitter for any updates on that. But with a hip and oblique injury, he was actually knocked out of their game against the Seattle Seahawks. He had to leave that game and was not able to finish. That was very impactful to their defense, which we'll talk about later, but it's looking like he might not be able to go. Trent Williams, their star left tackle for an offensive line that has struggled, is not the best offensive line in the world anyways. With an ankle injury, he did not practice Wednesday or Thursday either. So those are two really high-profile names, Eli. And then the three other names of players who were not practicing through Wednesday and Thursday were Kevin Givens, one of their rotational defensive tackles with a groin injury, Tatum Bethune, one of their rotational linebackers with a knee injury, and then Jacob Cowing, one of their depth receivers with a concussion, is still in concussion protocol. But Eli, it's really going to be about, obviously, Purdy, we already talked about that, but Bosa and Trent Williams possibly not being able to go is pretty big time.
Yeah, and there's both like going to be the missing pieces that are a concern, but also like the 49ers are just very banged up in general. Danny Heifetz at the Ringer Fantasy Football Podcast is like to say that the healthiest person on the 49ers offense is Ricky Pearsall, and he was shot 2 months ago.
Yeah, exactly. He missed, a good chunk of being shot, and we haven't even talked about the fact that, Christian McCaffrey's just coming back from injury. He hasn't really looked the same since coming back from that bilateral Achilles tendonitis. Brandon Ayuk is out for the season. Several other players missing time for them. Jawan Jennings has been in and out with a hip injury. He's back now. George Kittle just missed last week with a hamstring injury, but it sounds like he's going to play this weekend. They've had a lot of, in and out of the lineup here.
Deebo Samuel has been playing, but hasn't looked the same as he did last year. So hopefully we're looking at the post Captain America Civil War Avengers rather than the end game Avengers. That's what I'm hoping for this game.
And you can just keep going down the list. Obviously, they still don't have Dre Greenlaw, who unfortunately tore his Achilles in the Super Bowl last year. He's still working his way back. Talanoa Hufanga, one of their safeties who had been an All-Pro previously, he's not playing either. He's been out for a long stretch of time. You can just go down and down the list. They are just missing guys at almost every single level up. Javon Hargrave tore his triceps earlier this year. He's out for the season. They are super banged up right now. But hey, a wounded animal is a dangerous animal. And so there's going to be a lot to talk about in this one. But anything else on the injury report you wanted to touch on, or should we move on to our game preview?
Let's move on.
All right, let's boogie. Okay, moving on to the game preview, just some facts. The game is in Green Bay at 3:25 Lambeau time, local time. It's supposed to be 45 degrees with a slight chance of rain during the game. Looks like it might pick up raining around the second or third quarter. So that's something to keep an eye on. Green Bay is currently favored by 2.5 points with an over-under of 47.5 for an implied score of 25 to 23 around. But I would imagine this line might get taken off by Vegas, given that we don't really know who's going to be playing quarterback for the Niners. So that spread is certainly subject to change. So it sounds like, Vegas seems to think these teams are pretty even, given the fact that, it's in Lambeau, but it's about a 3-point spread. So kind of even on a neutral site territory. Some, update on what's been going on with the Niners. We've been talking about them a little bit already. They're 5-5. Coming off of a last-second loss to the Seattle Seahawks, where, 12 seconds left, Geno Smith was able to run in a touchdown to beat them in San Francisco. They are currently, like we mentioned, sitting at last in the NFC West, but only one game of back of first. Very tight in the division right now. But Eli, that kind of brings us to our first little bit of segments, which is Hey Now Play Nice, my dad's favorite segment. Let's talk a little bit about what's been going well for the 49ers so far this year. What are they doing well? What are some strengths of the team? Say something nice about the 49ers.
So George Kittle is still absolutely horrifying as a player. But one of the things I wanted to touch on is that this is only the third game back with Christian McCaffrey. During his absence, they had a pretty serviceable run offense. So last year they were second overall in run offense, down to 12th this year, but down to 12th playing with Jordan Mason is still fairly impressive. So if they get some amount of bounce back from CMC, that is going to be a little terrifying. Christian McCaffrey was the running back one for rushing yards by about 300 yards last year. And just through the last 2 games doesn't seem to be in a limited role. He had 32 carries through 2 games, so 16 carries a game. He was at 17 carries a game last year. So if he is, back and in form and moving in that direction, that is something that we're definitely going to have to worry about. However, in past seasons where he has missed time due to injury, he has often not played out a full season even after coming back. It's been pretty common for him to come back for like 3 or 4 games and then be out. So I don't want to say prone to re-injury because that's not really a thing, but like maybe it's kind of a thing.
It is kind of weird how Kyle Shanahan, like they had a good running game with Jordan Mason, and then McCaffrey comes back, clearly looking like kind of hobbled, and he's like, you know what? We're just going right back to your regular workload, buddy. We're not going to split this. We're not going to ease you back in. You're back, buddy. Like we're going like 90% of snaps, normal workload. We don't care. We're giving you everything you got. Yeah, no, I'm a little surprised that because like, a lot of. I guess McVay does the same thing where he doesn't really split carries very much, and I guess Shanny doesn't really want to either. But it's funny to contrast that with LaFleur, where it's like even when guys are available, he's like, "We're not going over 60%. We're not going to do that."
Right, and I wonder if part of that is because of the Niners' position in the standings, where they started getting into must-win situations much earlier than they are used to in a season. So it could be that they're feeling pressured to get wins from their big players now that they're available.
Yeah, and Jordan Mason was also dealing with injury at one point. He had a shoulder injury that had been bothering him for a few weeks, so maybe that has something to do with it too. The thing I was going to say about the Niners, though, that was nice is they really are a lot better than their record would say they are. They are much better than a 500 team. If you actually look at the games that they played, they had a lead with 2 minutes left in 3 of their losses and just ended up blowing them. It was the Rams game where they gave up a massive punt return and then gave up essentially another big pass interference, and then the Rams were able to win almost as time expired. It was the Cardinals game where they were driving into the red zone up like a good amount at the end of the game and then fumbled, and then the Cardinals were able to drive all the way back and win. And then it was this pass game against the Seahawks where they had the ball at the 40-yard line with a 4-point lead and were not able to get a first down that would have pretty much ended the game, and then come back. The Seahawks are able to drive it all the way down the field, 80 yards, and score a touchdown to win the game. They're a lot better than their record would say they are. They've lost a lot of close games. And then by DVOA, that supports that as well. DVOA per FTN Fantasy is a really good metric in terms of keeping in mind how a team performs, but also keeping in mind their strength of schedule. Niners have had a pretty hard schedule. By offense, they're 5th overall, 4th in passing, and 10th in rushing. By defense, they're 6th overall, 3rd against the pass, and 19th against the run. So they're not great against the run this year. Where they've really struggled is special teams. They're 31st in special teams, I think, if I remember correctly. I forgot to write that part down. But by offense and defense, the 2 more important, phases of the game, they're still a really good team. It's just it has not resulted in wins so far this year for them because of some, poor situational football, some just bad luck. I do think they are a better team than their record says they are, though.
I'm knocking on wood as you say that offense and defense are more important than special teams. And Benny seems to agree with me.
Yes, Benny does.
My dog joined in there. I don't want to be cursed by that in some playoff game.
No, that's a very, very good point. We have special teams is just as important. You are just equally as important as offense and defense. We don't have a favorite child. Don't worry about it. No, I've seen enough special teams disasters sink Packers playoff hopes that, yeah, I take it all back. I didn't mean it. But yeah, so it's been a bit of a tough go for them. They've had to rotate through kickers. Similarly to the Packers, theirs is more due to injury and less due to incompetence. We can call it what it is. But they've had to rotate from Moody, who got injured, to Matthew Wright, who got injured, to Anders Carlson, making an appearance for the Niners, and now they're back to Moody, back from injury. But yeah, anything else you wanted to say about the Niners here, though, while we're, being friendly?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is something about Brock Purdy as like a quarterback and his style of play, or something that's present in the Shanahan coaching, is when Brock Purdy breaks into a scramble, he does it much faster than a lot of other quarterbacks in the league. Like, you can see where he's willing to bail on a play, like half a second, a full second faster, and that gets him the extra yards, gets him to the sideline, out around the coverage. So Brock Purdy's weirdly a top 10 rushing quarterback in the league.
Yeah,
by yards, attempts, and yards per carry.
Yeah, I think I saw he has the second most scrambles per PFF and the third most yards from scrambles. And especially after last week and what we let Caleb Williams do on the ground against us, I'm definitely a little worried about it.
Yeah, so I will definitely sleep better if we find out that Brandon Allen's going to be playing, because I don't think he will have those rushing instincts that Purdy has or has had coached into him by Shanahan.
Yeah, and I think it was last week, Caleb Williams had 70 yards running, but 5 for 49 on scrambles. The rest were design runs. Packers had no answer for it, and that was with Edgerrin Cooper on the field, who's probably their best QB spy linebacker. It sounds like they're not going to have him, so I mean, I can't imagine that they would be. I know Cooper didn't do a great job at it, but I can't imagine any of these other guys are going to do a better job, and so I'm definitely a little bit worried about that. But yeah, I mean, might I say sneaky athletic? Brock Purdy, sneaky athletic?
Yeah, that's the one.
He's twitchier than you think he is. Like when he's back there, he's kind of Kyler-esque, like a little bit like a less souped up version of Kyler in terms of like the quickness. He doesn't quite have the top speed that Kyler does, but in terms of like twitchy, escaping the pocket, getting away from pass rushers, like he's more athletic than he gets credit for, I think.
Yeah, and I think Kyler is more capable in those scenarios where he's contacted. But it's still not something I want to face.
No, yeah, I'm not eager to face it at all. In fact, you might even argue I'm nervous to face it, which does kind of bring us to our second segment, which is things that we're nervous about, which constant state of being for me. But Eli, what's the first thing that you're nervous about in this matchup?
So one of the things that we've seen for the Niners this year compared to last year is they're not making as much progress down the field with those chunk plays. Chunk plays are plays of 20 to 49 yards. Anyway, we're seeing less of those from them this year, but I think that's the kind of thing that the Packers are vulnerable to. So if the Niners are going to regress to that, it's possible it'll be in this game.
Yeah.
And even with that said, Niners are fourth in third down conversion rate. We saw our abysmal third down defense last week. So that is something that I think will be involved.
It's super weird because our third down defense had been so good through before the bye, and then we just got shredded on third down last week. It was 9 of 16 on third down and then 3 of 3 on fourth down. We just could not get off the field, and I have more statistics on that later. We'll talk about it. But yeah,
and now that we're out of the hey now play nice section, I can say that maybe our third down defense last week was bad because our total and utter disrespect for the Bears just did not think it was a concern. We're like, yeah, you can get a third down.
Yeah, whatever. It's fine. It's gonna be great. No, yeah, I'm definitely nervous about the third down defense, nervous about chunk plays, nervous about our tackling. We didn't tackle very well last week either. The thing that I would say I'm most nervous about is something you've already hinted at, though, is guarding George Kittle is going to be a problem in this game, especially with Cooper out, who I would argue is probably our best coverage linebacker. But we all know how good George Kittle is. He's second on the Niners in yards per game. He's second on their team in EPA per target. He leads the team in catch rate, leads the team in touchdowns. He's been an absolute animal so far this year. And the Packers are not good at guarding tight ends, even with their full complement of linebackers. They're fifth worst at guarding tight ends per DVOA. And I got to say, I'm nervous. I'm nervous about it. I do wonder what the approach is. Do you think that they might try Manning Xavier McKinney up on him? I don't know.
That's what I would like to see. It feels like a prototypical Packers game memory of being in a clutch situation and a tight end just catching an absolutely wide open ball with nobody in 15 yards. And then you start worrying about and now we have to tackle him. That's not good either.
Yeah, that's the thing. And the problem I do think with I think McKinney's probably the only guy that you would have give a decent chance of guarding him one-on-one. But the problem is if McKinney isn't covering up for some of these other guys, deficiencies on the back end, does everything else become a problem? So I'm worried about guarding George Kittle. I'm actually also really worried about guarding Juwan Jennings because this guy just is playing like an absolute freak of nature right now for them. I think you have something later on him, so I won't spoil too much. But without Jair, I'm worried about that. I'm worried about just all of our coverage. I don't know how we're going to guard people, which is another, I hope Brandon Allen plays. Obviously, watch Brandon Allen just absolutely go nuclear on us. Although, if I'm looking for a silver lining, at least I get to make fun of my Niners friends and be like, see, anyone can do it. Brock Purdy's not even that good. But no, Brock Purdy is I do think Brock Purdy is pretty good. But
and
so
like George Kittle, he was out last week with the hamstring. Is on the injury report, but he's done some interviews and he sounds pretty hyped to play the Packers. I think he's going to be back at full force.
I think he said like to reporters like, yeah, I'm going to play. So, and I think also I remember Shanahan said he was very close to playing last week. They just couldn't quite get him there. So it sounds like he's expected to play. But yeah, I'm a little bit nervous about it. Not feeling great about our covering of the middle of the field, because this is a team that likes to target the middle of the field. They don't like throwing to the sidelines. Right. And that is definitely the weakness of our defense right now. Well, actually, they're one of the weaknesses of our defense right now. There are a few to pick from. But anyway, that is something that we're nervous about. I am a little bit worried about those specific matchups, but Packers not totally helpless in this one. The Niners have some weaknesses of their own, as you know, described by their record. Eli, what's the first thing that you think is somewhere where the Niners maybe have a weakness that the Packers could look at and look at attacking?
So I rewatched the Niners Seahawks game yesterday, and in that last quarter, Jackson Smith and Jigba was open all the time, making tons of first down awarding plays. And I took a look at like the parts of the field where he was, catching balls, running routes, and it's pretty similar to what Romeo Doubs does. So I think we might be able to exploit some similar weaknesses in the Niners defense that Seattle was able to. So get Doubs some of those. Like it's also those, middle of the field, right to left routes where just catching it, and I think we could sort of replicate that success. So that's Dobbs. I forget if no, he's not my player to watch, but he's one of my players to watch.
Yeah, and I think I remember looking at the, by DVOA, they can break down essentially how each team is at defending each, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, tight ends, et cetera, et cetera. That's where I got that number for the tight ends earlier for the Packers. If I remember correctly, the Niners are really bad at guarding wide receiver 2s. They're like 29th in the league, whereas they're actually pretty good at everything else. So that is definitely somewhere where I think Dobbs can, shine. I do think, though, that it sounds like the Niners might be getting Charvarius Ward back in this game. He's missed, a few games due to personal tragedy, which is very sad, but it sounds like he might come back. So maybe that makes their defense against wide receiver 2s a little bit better than the numbers would say. So that's something I am kind of wondering about there. Although I do think, like you mentioned, they were able to attack that middle of the field. Devontae Campbell has not been very good in coverage so far for the Niners, to say the least. A long lineage of Packers linebackers who go to the Niners and then don't play very well. Love it. Oren Burks, shout out. But anyway, yeah, so that's definitely somewhere where I think that the Packers can attack. One thing that I was keeping an eye on is a weakness of theirs, and this was something that Rob Domofsky tweeted out. If Nick Bosa can't go, they just have no pass rush. They can't get home at all. And so with Bosa, they have a pressure rate of 33% and a sack rate of 8%. This was from Rob Domofsky of ESPN. And then without him, that falls all the way down to 18% and 2%, which would be really close to the bottom of the league. So when he's not playing, and this was another thing against the Seahawks, that final drive that they had where, Geno Smith's marching him down for a touchdown, almost all of that was with Nick Bosa off the field. And in that game itself, with Nick Bosa on the field, the Seahawks had about 3.3 yards per play. And with Nick Bosa off the field, it doubled up to 6.2. So he is the linchpin of their defense. And without him out there, it's a much weaker, a lot less teeth to that defense. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I was actually looking at in that drive that you mentioned, a lot of it was targeting Jackson Smith and Jigba. A bunch of it was also Geno Smith, not necessarily known for his wheels, scrambling a lot. And they seem very susceptible to the QB run game. Malik Willis, maybe a couple snaps here and there, maybe?
That was
I don't know.
that Mina Kimes pointed out on her show on ESPN earlier this week.
That's right. That's where I heard it.
The 49ers have the second worst rushing defense against quarterbacks for yards per attempt. So quarterbacks are getting 6.5 yards per attempted run.
Nice, sick.
Which is not defensively sustainable.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
You never have to see a third down if you do that.
Bringing in the sneaky goal line Malik Willis,
I
think would be fun to see.
I do wonder about obviously I don't think generally it's a good idea to take your best player off the field and take Jordan Love off the field on offense. I do wonder about, like, I'm just keeping an eye on what the Saints do with Taysom Hill, and I'm like,
Porque no los dos.
I was like, can we do a little bit of that? Like, what are our thoughts on some Malik Willis Taysom Hill packages? Because the red zone offense has been really bad, and I'm willing to just start trying stuff.
It's impossible for me to believe that Taysom Hill is as old as he is.
Isn't
the
he
game
like
he put up
34?
last week. Yeah,
he's like 34 years old. How is what
Which,
is going
among
on?
Quarterbacks, he's not like old, but among running backs, he's ancient.
And the style of play. I mean, we're seeing, like, obviously now that I say this, Deebo Samuel's going to go for 200 yards, but we're seeing Deebo, like, with his physical play style start to wear down a little bit. He's only like 29 years old. And Taysom Hill has been doing this for longer and just as physically and playing like special teams as a gunner. And somehow is still putting up he had like 3 touchdowns and 200 total yards last week.
Yeah, just a bewildering human being.
It doesn't make sense. I mean, he is like the most, like, I would hear an argument for like best all-around football player of the last like 10 to 15 years. Like, in terms of just, you could probably play him on defense, and I would like to see it. I feel like he wouldn't be that bad. I feel like he'd be playable at linebacker.
Mm-hmm.
But that does kind of, take us into, we're talking about Malik Willis in the red zone. We've clearly lost the plot a little bit. But that does kind of take us into how we hope the Packers approach this game. Is there anything that you want to see the Packers specifically do in this one?
So you're going to talk a little bit later about red zone effectiveness, but part of that comes into mind is I think the Packers need to make every drive matter. So like scoring points, getting the field goals, I think that's going to be an important part of this game. I don't think we were going to be able to afford to walk away from drives without points.
Yeah.
And also the Niners are number 2 in time of possession, only behind the Steelers. Steelers are like the drag you into the mud and beat you there team. I do not like the idea of being subject to the Niners timeline for a game. I don't want them to be the ones managing the clock and then trying to like fit our game plan into what they give us. So if we can keep putting points on the board, they're not going to be able to do that as effectively.
And I mean, you mentioned like the time of possession game. I mean, that's kind of just what happened to the Packers last week against the Bears. The Bears pretty much held the ball for like the whole game. We only got like 6 or 7 drives. And when you only have 6 or 7 chances at it, you're just way more prone to variance and letting a team that it maybe is not favored against you, sneak one out on you. And honestly, the Bears probably should have won that game, but the Packers made one last play at the end there and, were able to get it out. But I think I remember breaking this down with my dad. We let up drives of like 8 plays, 10 plays, 12 plays, 11 plays. Like every single drive was double digit and they're just marching it down the field on us. But yeah, like you mentioned, time of possession going to be really important in this one. And that does kind of connect to what I wanted to talk about, which is, can we just run the damn ball? Like, can we just run the ball? Like we mentioned when I was talking about, they're better than their record. The one place where they have not been very good and below average so far this year by DVOA is their run defense. They're 19th by DVOA against the run. Specifically, outside runs, they've been very poor against. This is per NFL Pro. They are currently tied for 31st in the league by EPA per carry on runs to the outside. So teams have just been able to, get to the outside, run around them, beat them to the edge. Unfortunately, Green Bay isn't amazing at running to the outside. They're pretty league average. They're 14th by EPA per carry and 19th by success rate on outside runs. Obviously, a bunch of those numbers are a little bit skewed by, the 2 Malik Willis games and the other half of a Malik Willis game where it's like a very different offense, we'll say. But I do think, you're still at least average there, and the Niners are really bad there. So let's just please run to the outside. I think that should be something that the Packers are able to attack.
Yeah, and then one last thing on this is I think the Packers, like, if they're still in it going into the fourth quarter, I think they will be in good shape. Like, I think the Packers should play the long game, maybe play a little safer with Jordan Love than they have in a couple of the games they've had. If we can not have turnovers, giving up big points, could be in good shape. So in fourth quarters this year, the 49ers are 27th in points allowed, and the Packers are first in points allowed in the fourth quarter. So pretty drastic difference there in fourth quarter defenses. The Packers haven't given up a single point at home in the fourth quarter yet this year.
Knock on wood.
Knock on
but
wood.
It is interesting because I also saw a similar stat where it's like, oh goodness, I can't even remember which metric it was, but it was like the Niners defense by quarter. It's like top 10 defense in the first quarter, top 10 defense in the second quarter, top 10 defense in the third quarter, and then just like 29th in the fourth. Like, I don't know what's happening. It's like, do they get tired? Is it a coaching thing? Do they get like passive? I honestly couldn't tell you. It just seems like every fourth quarter, the defense seems to, spring a leak.
So in the Seahawks game specifically, at least, like they had the Nick Bosa problem, obviously,
yeah.
But this on a lot of sets, they were dropping multiple people off the line into coverage, and I think that tired them out a lot.
There's like, I got nothing left.
I can't check
please. No, yeah, I think
they were moving slow by the end of that game.
The problem is, if it's a fourth quarter game, I'm just going to be an anxious wreck. Can we just make this a clean game, please? And you mentioned, I do think Jordan Love made better decisions in the Bears game. Obviously, the pick, I think, was more just a bad throw than a bad decision.
Right.
Can we please stop the interception streak? I'm getting tired, man. It's 8 straight games. And obviously, I think, play style wise, I think interceptions are, okay, maybe this is a homer take. I think interceptions may be a little overrated. You have to be willing to throw the ball downfield to be a good quarterback. And I think some things will, work their way back from variance. We've talked about it before, but he's closer to 14th or 12th in turnover worthy play rate, than he is, leading the league in interceptions. So I think that some of that will even out over time. I've been saying that for weeks. I'm pointing at the rule book about how dogs aren't allowed to play basketball, and it's not doing anything for me right now.
Yeah, it was kind of similar to last year's Josh Allen, where he had an extremely high turnover rate and a very low turnover worthy play rate.
And it's like they're catching everything.
Bounce back this year quite well. So.
Exactly. And so hopefully we can get a bounce back in the second half here. But that does move us over to our next segment, which is Don't Take Your Eye Off That Guy. Who are you highlighting in this one? Either a player you think is going to have a good game or a player who thinks is going to be very important for this game.
All of my friends are going to make fun of me for this, but I have my eye on the Packers kicker, Brandon McManus. I think field goals are going to be important in this game. I think we will need to get... I don't want to see punts. I think punting is how we lose this game. I think we need to make our field goals, get our points. I think the Niners red zone offense, which you're going to talk about later, it's bad enough that we need to match their field goals with field goals if we can. So if we miss one of those, that could very easily be the game.
Yeah, and we talked about the weather possibly raining. I mean, maybe I think that could affect the kicking game a little bit, but hopefully it affects it for both sides evenly, and we don't have a scenario where it's like, oh, cool, it's dumping rain while the Packers have the ball, and it's clearing up just as the Niners come on the field. Very cool, very cash money. The player that I'm keeping an eye on, though, I think McManus is obviously a really good choice because, I do think, special teams. I mentioned earlier, offense and defense are more important than special teams. I take it all back. Special teams very important. They won us the game this past week, so how could I say that? And the kicking game. Like you mentioned, I think points are going to be at a premium. I think it's going to be an under game. I think it's going to be an ugly, pretty low scoring game overall. Maybe a couple, scores at the last second to make that over hit, make some gamblers happy. For me, I have 2 players though. Josh Jacobs, we already talked about the run game. I don't need to go too much more into that, but I think it's going to be a really important game for him. The other one is Kenny Clark. We really need him to step up down the stretch here because he's had a very down year. He's on pace for 0 sacks. He does not have a sack yet this year. He's on pace for a career low in pressures, and he's on pace for a career low in stops, and he's on pace for his worst PFF grade of his career. We need more. And their interior offensive line is not great. Their guards are fine, but their center is a weak spot, Brendel. And we need Kenny to pick it up here down the stretch if we want to get where we want to get.
This is something that I have less information about than you and Matt. Is there anything schematically that has changed with how Kenny is being used compared to previous years by the new defensive coach?
So with a 4-man front, you're going to have less one-on-one opportunities. So I don't think he's actually getting doubled a lot more than he was last year, though. I need to double check that. He's just not winning. None of the guys really are up front.
Okay.
I wonder how much it is, not having as many bodies next to him. I wonder, in a 4-man front with a 4-3, you're like supposed to be gap penetrating more than you are like standing someone up and, working 2 gaps. He's not 2-gapping as much. I wonder if, we talked about all offseason, this should be really good for Kenny. He should be better. Maybe we were just wrong. Maybe that's not something he's actually good at. And the scheme does not cater to what he does best. I don't really know. I don't think it should be this bad though. Like I could see a scenario where he's not as good at this and maybe this isn't the best way to use him. I don't think it should look this bad though. I don't think it should be 0 sacks, career low pressure rate. Like I don't think it should be everything looks terrible.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but we need him to play better down the stretch. And historically he usually picks it up around December, November. But I can't say that I'm holding my breath. Any other players that you wanted that you thought about touching on here that you were like maybe, but you ended up going with McManus? Anyone else that you were, for me, it's like also Carrington Valentine stepping in for Jair. It's the linebackers. Quay Walker had a pretty bad game against the Bears. They need him to bounce back, especially with no Cooper. There's a lot of players we could have picked.
I'm also not going to keep my eye off Juwan Jennings.
Oh God,
he has been a quite suitable Brandon Ayuk replacement. He's like 80 to 90% of a Brandon Ayuk, depending on the week. So apart from last year, where Brandon Ayuk had a phenomenal year, he was second overall in PFF grade behind just Tyreek Hill, and second overall behind Tyreek Hill and a couple other stats as well. So apart from that year, Juwan Jennings has been performing about as well as Brandon Ayuk has done in any other year. And that's a huge step up for him. I don't think anyone was expecting him to fill that role quite as well as he does. And
he bodied us in the playoffs. Like he was
right.
We could not guard him in that divisional game. Every time there was a third down, they call it third and Juwan apparently. Every single time there was a third down, it was just immediately going to him, and there was just nothing we could do about it, it felt like. And I do worry it might be more of the same. We don't have he's a pretty physical receiver. We don't have the most physical we have physical corners, we don't have the biggest corners. Like he's a pretty big receiver. Valentine's pretty skinny, Nixon's not very tall, Bullard's not very big. Like they're all physical, but none of them have the size of Jennings, and so I worry about getting boxed out there. If
he catches and if he avoids the first tackle, I don't see him going for less than 15, 20 yards on that play.
That's the other thing. Is this going to be a gang tackling season? Yeah, I'm worried about him. I'm worried about George Kittle. I think those are the two on offense I'm most worried about.
Yep.
That does take us over, though, to overtime, where we just, things that didn't fit in our nice little buckets. Anything here that you wanted to touch on that we hadn't gotten a chance to talk about yet?
No, I got a little intimidated by the wall of text that you put up, so I'm going to let you vamp for a while.
I have a lot of things to touch on. Man, where to begin? Let's start with the red zone. We already talked about this. I think it could just come down. You mentioned taking points. Both these teams suck in the red zone. The Niners are 26th in red zone touchdown percentage, and the Packers are 27th. So that's not great. I think it could just come down to who is able to punch those in, which is a very boring bit of analysis, but I really do think that might just be it. Packers, came away with 2, just 0 points the last time, and the Niners have been forced to kick field goals a lot in the red zone. So that's something I'm keeping my eye on. The other thing is third downs. Packers situationally really struggled last week, 9 of 16 to the Bears, who had not been a good third down offense. Right now, the Packers are also really bad on third down on offense. They're 22nd in the league at third down conversion rate at 36.6%. And you might ask, well, how much of that is, Malik Willis? Even just looking at the last 3 games, they are even worse. They're at 25%, which is 31st in the league over the last 3 games. So really bad. But a little bit of, optimism. The Niners are terrible at third down defense. They are 25th in opponent third down conversion rate. So a bit of a stoppable force versus a movable object on the third down side for that side of the football. And then going the other way, the Niners are really good on third down on offense. They have a 45.4% third down conversion rate, which is 4th in the league. And they're even better the last 3 games. They're at 52.6%. So they're converting over half of their third downs over the last 3 games. But conversely, the Packers defense is pretty good on third downs for the season. They're 13th in third down conversion rate allowed. But just this past week, they got absolutely shredded by the Bears on third down, 9 of 16. So that's something I'm a little bit worried about. Are they going to be able to bounce back to playing third downs how they had been earlier in the season? Or are they going to look more like they did last week? And in that case, I could see a scenario where the Niners have the ball for 2/3 of the game and the Packers just never see the football, which is something I'm a little bit worried about there.
Yeah, and that's a concern for me as well. I would love for the Packers to be in control of the timeline for this game.
Yeah. And it comes down to running the ball and stopping the run, which are two things that I feel like we have talked about the Packers for time immortal. Or time immemorial. What's the actual? Who knows? Who cares?
Time immemorial. Yeah.
There we go. And then the final thing I have is a question for you, and this is more of a think piece. The blitz question. So we all know the Packers cannot get pressure. It is not a secret anymore. They're 26th in the league in pressure rate at 31% per NFL Pro. When they blitz, though, they do get pressure. So the blitzes have been effective at generating pressure. They have the 6th highest pressure rate in the league when blitzing at 47.1%. So way, way better, and then even way better just compared to their peers as well. The issue is, though, when they blitz, they aren't getting sacks. They have a 7% sack rate, 7.1%, which is 22nd in the league. So they're not getting home. And because of that, they're really bad on defense when blitzing. They're allowing 0.19 EPA per pass allowed, which is second worst in the league, and only the Jaguars are worse when blitzing in terms of EPA per pass allowed. So 31st in the league when blitzing, even though they are getting pressured. And you compare that to actually negative 0.2 EPA per play when not blitzing, which is actually third best in the league amongst teams when not blitzing. So they can't get pressures, so they blitz to get pressure. But when they blitz, they can't get home, and so they don't stop anyone. So is it better to just never get pressure, I guess, because their defense is better when they're not blitzing? I don't really understand. It doesn't make sense to me. But the reason I bring it up is because the Niners are susceptible to the blitz, and it's something that has plagued them for a long time. Different people have talked about this. Packers legend Kurt Benkert has talked about how they don't have a system where they are able to adjust protections. They just throw hot against the blitz, and because of that, some numbers for you. The Niners, when they aren't blitzed, are at 0.14 EPA per pass, which is 4th in the league. And then when they are blitzed, they're at 0.04 EPA per play, which is 11th in the league amongst blitz teams. So they are still above average offense when blitzed, but they're a top 5 offense when they're not blitzed. So my question for you, Eli, what do you do? Do you blitz them or do you not blitz them?
I feel like it's a weird kind of rock, paper, scissors situation where if you know your opponent doesn't have rock in their arsenal, like, you can play around that, and that has to be worse than if you know that they're just a bad rock player. Like, if they're always throwing the rock into the paper, like, it's still better to have the rock. So like, it's
tough because just this past week, another number for you is the Packers blitzed 9 times against the Bears, got absolutely shredded because of course they did. They only got one pressure. Like, on those 9 blitzes. Like, they weren't even, like, it's one thing, like, they have been getting pressure with the blitzes. Just this past week, though, they blitzed 9 times and got nothing. They got nothing at all out of those blitzes.
It's possible they just need to dial it back to a minimum extreme, because, it's not getting the job done.
And it's weird because, like, the only way they can get pressure is to blitz, but when they blitz, they get shredded. And so they can't blitz, but then they don't get pressure, and the teams are able to hold the ball on them. They're in a real catch-22 right now on defense, and I don't know where you go from here. They're not, I think, if I remember correctly, their blitz rate is not actually super high. They're in the bottom third of the league in blitz rate. They only really do it on third downs. They don't do it much on first and second downs at all. But just this past week, they tried it on third downs a good amount, and they did not go well for them. But anyway, that's just something I wanted to, riff on a little bit with you, because I think it's interesting and I don't really know what to do with that information.
Well, I mean, and part of it is, like, depending on the outcome of the blitz. Like, if the sack is an absolute drive ender, then that's still a different result than if it's like, we sacked him and then we gave up a 3rd and 15. So it's like
that third and 19 against the Bears was so stupid. Stupid that they did all that work to get them to 3rd and 19 and then immediately just shot themselves in the foot. But also, it was a good play by Caleb Williams as well. No, don't want to take anything away from him. But it is frustrating when you're giving up 3rd and 19 and then 4th and 3 right back to back. But that kind of does it for overtime. Nothing else I really had there. It looks like nothing else we really had there. Let's move over as we're finishing up here, though. Bottom line, Eli, the 49ers win if blank.
I said the 49ers win if the Packers lose the turnover battle. Like, if one pick is going to be tough, Two is gonna be unbeatable.
Yeah, I 100% agree. If we lose the turnover battle, I find it hard to imagine we're going to be able to find a way to win the game.
Especially because this is going to be like a slow, ugly game, like you talked about.
Yeah, and yeah, like you mentioned as well, I think that there are not going to be a lot of possessions in this game, especially with the weather as well. I have the 49ers win if they play better situational football than Green Bay. That's converting in the red zone, that's converting on third downs, et cetera, lengthening drives. If the Packers can win those downs, which they did not do last week, I think that they have a good chance of winning this game and outplaying them. But I think it's really going to come down to, red zone and third downs, which most games do come down to. So not high level analysis, but I do think it's going to matter extra in this one. But flipping it over, Packers win if blank.
I think the Packers win if they contain George Kittle. And I know this is a rarity, but not an impossibility, where every once in a while we will have a game where somebody in the Packers coverage team plays like an absolute superhero and wins the game basically on their own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if we see one of those games, I think we're going to be in good shape.
Yeah, McKinney, maybe Evan Williams.
Yep.
He hasn't. Yeah, it could be either of them. I have a kind of. This is a bit of cheating, but I kind of just have the inverse of what I had for the Niners. The Packers win if they can just play clean football and convert in the red zone, convert touchdowns in the red zone. I think that battle between two really bad red zone teams, the one that ends up actually outperforming their usual numbers usually ends up winning, and I think that could just be that. The other thing I thought about here is just if they're able to just really get Josh Jacobs going and hold the ball for long stretches of this game and get the Niners playing from behind, I think that could be really big. But yeah, so that's that. Finishing things up here, score prediction, what do you got?
I've got the Packers winning 23-20. I've got the optimistic prediction.
Okay, I got the Niners 24, Packers 21. I think the Niners are just going to be really desperate in this game, really, really desperate. And I think the Packers are coming off, I could argue maybe their worst performance on defense of the year. And I would argue their worst performing defense of the year. I need to see them play better this week. I need to see them actually get some stops on defense. I just think that the Niners are going to pull out every single bag of tricks that they have. And obviously this probably changes if Brock Purdy is not able to go. And we still don't necessarily know what's going on with that. Although I will double check really quick to see if we've had any breaking news while we are recording here. I'm looking at Nick Wagner of ESPN as we speak. It sounds like still no updates there, though. So we'll be keeping you updated on Twitter, though. Check out @FatherSonPacker as we wrap up things here. Eli, any last bits of things that you wanted to talk about for this game as we part ways here?
My score prediction I don't think really changes if Brandon Allen is the one playing. I think the Packers will just play down to his level instead of just thrashing the Niners. So I think we'll still get basically the same game. It'll just be much uglier from the Packers. Where
I was gonna say
it's either they're gonna play well and get this score, or they're gonna play poorly and get the same score.
Nice. Yeah, do a little play down to the competition. I wouldn't be surprised. But anyway, hopefully we are talking to you next time. Eli will be joining us again for the post game for this one. We'll be recording that next week, so hopefully we'll be talking to you after a win. But anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Once again, please subscribe, please comment, please leave a like, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We'd really appreciate it. Once again, check us out on Twitter @FatherSonPacker. A lot of important injury updates for this game, so it'll be important to keep up with those, and we'll be keeping you up with those. We'll be keeping you up with injury updates, roster moves, content from other Packers content creators. Please give a follow. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. Hopefully we'll be talking to you next time after a Packers win. And until then, go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.